Hey guys, Toolman Tim here. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. It's Thursday evening, which means it's time for another edition of the Workshop podcast and yet another edition of the Repairedness series. Repairedness, the art of home maintenance when help isn't around the corner. So tonight we're going to talk about the nine most common water supply disasters, how we can fix them. But before we dig into that, first thing we got to do, get a few items of housekeeping out of the way. I always have a few announcements. We get them out of the way and we move right on. And of course, absolutely happy Thanksgiving. This foolish Canadian here scheduled an episode right in the middle of American Thanksgiving. So I apologize, but you'll find out I had a reason I wanted to get a few episodes in over the next little while. I'll give you a little heads up on what's going on here. All good. So first off, guys, don't forget that the workshop is just one podcast of an entire community of podcast and content creators at the Preppers Broadcast Network. So this, man, I'm addicted. I got to listen to as much as I can from PBN throughout the week. Excuse me, guys. And Prepper Dad this week had an awesome episode about buying seasonal stuff after the season's over. Absolutely love that. Hey, Know Your Joe, happy Thanksgiving. Excellent episode. You guys want to go back, check that out. Dave, the NBC guy, he did a really good episode this week on putting together kind of a mutual assistance radio group, kind of setting up a local radio repeater network, which was really cool. And then the matter of facts, guys, I listened to that while I was going around checking on my bank properties this week. They had kind of a friendly debate between the two about the merits of bugging in, bugging out, the benefits, the downside, the negative aspects to it, and it was absolutely great. So you guys want to go back and check out some of the stuff you missed this week on PBN. Awesome stuff there. And then also, if you want to know what's been going on with me on the Workshop podcast, this week we had Holly the vet. She was on Sunday night. She was awesome. I figured I'd share a couple things right quick. One thing she said that cracked me up was that chickens are just basically little dinosaurs. Hey, Charlotte, how are you? And then she also said, she was full. We're going to have her back on the show because she had so much good insight for us. She said, in a pinch, a pillowcase works as a cat carrier. She said, never take your cat to the vet without it being in a cat carrier, because it was just one of those things that she's seen so many cats absolutely disappear. Hi, Migray, how are you? I hope I pronounced that right. I'm sorry if I didn't. And then a third one, which was great, was zip tying the flea collar to the inside of your collar for the dog. She said, the biggest, most important thing about getting a flea collar working for a dog or a cat is, well, mostly a dog. She had some other stuff to say about that, but was to make sure that it gets good skin contact all the time. She said, easiest way to do it, zip tie it to the dog's collar. So very good. Nice. How are you tonight? Feeling lucky? And this Sunday, I have Buddy Dempsey. He's coming on. And from the Buddy, I think I just mispronounced it. Sorry, guys. Anyway, from the Buddy DIY, the Bud DIY podcast, he's coming on here. And he's going to talk about becoming a woodworker, how that ties into preparedness, his recent journey on becoming a welder, and all that. So anyway, one more quick announcement, and then we'll move on to the meat, or the turkey, as we like to call it. And anyway, so real quick, December 9th, it's kind of weird, but anyway, December 9th is going to be my last episode of Repairedness until the first Thursday of January. So I had planned on taking off kind of 2 full weeks for content through Christmas, kind of the Christmas New Year's break. But we got kind of some bad news, whatever. Anyway, my father has to have some kind of somewhat serious surgery, and he lives on the other side of the continent. So I got to fly back there and I told him I would go back and visit with him for 10 days while he had his surgery and stuff. And I'm going to have some pre-recorded things on the YouTube channel, a couple of pre-recorded episodes, but I love doing these Repairedness episodes live. So I decided we're just going to slide it off. So January 6th, we'll get right back at it. We're going to have tonight, and then I believe 2 more episodes going on. And then there'll be a little hiatus in the middle, which really sucks because I love doing this. But I've also, for 2 years straight, never taken a week off with content. So it was time to do something like that. So anyway, that's enough of my yammering on of announcements for this week. And yeah, okay, so let's dive in. This is a good one. I've spent a ton of time putting together a whole bunch of stuff for you guys this week, and I love it. So the 9 most common water supply disasters and how to fix them yourself. That's what we're here for. So Intrepid Commander says everyone's left her home, even the wife is in bed. Kids are still up, but things have slowed way down. I'm glad. I know you guys have an awesome Thanksgiving down there. So and we celebrate Thanksgiving in October, which is the weirdest thing. I can't figure out why we don't do it the same time you guys do, but we celebrate it on Columbus Day. So anyway, so what we're going to talk about, becoming better at troubleshooting, what to keep on hand for these water supply issues. And then toward the end, I'm even going to throw some off-grid long-term solutions at you. Stuff that if, the literal shit hit the fan and you got to go a long way without ever being able to fix something, some of these off-grid solutions on how to get by without it. So, hey, Chris Dixon, how are you? Fellow Albertan in here. Things are still cooking here, he says, so to speak. Know your Joe. All right. So first off, guys, one thing I've always realized when dealing with plumbing emergencies is they never, ever happen on when it's convenient for you. They always happen in the evening, on the weekend, on a holiday, or on a holiday evening weekend. And plumbers are going to charge you. So sometimes being able to fix things, or at least keep something on hand, is just about limping something through until you can get someone there to help you, or until you can get a plumber there to help you when they're not going to charge you through the nose. And I get it. Everybody has to make money. But if you can limp your pressure tank or your deep well pump or whatever it happens to be through for, say, another 36 hours, and by doing that, you're going to save yourself $800 or $1,000 or whatever the hell it happens to be, then sometimes that's what this troubleshooting is all about. But hey, we're also here to be more self-sufficient, more independent, not being a lone wolf, but being able to fix all this stuff ourselves. So the first thing, each week I kind of want to talk about maybe a skill that we can learn a little bit as well. And troubleshooting was the one I wanted to talk about because troubleshooting, it's a tough one. I remember quite a few years ago, I worked in a computer repair shop, and troubleshooting was all that we ever did. And so, a lot of people are like, well, what the hell is troubleshooting? How do you do it? It sounds simple enough, but I really don't know where to start. But I got to tell you, if you want to get better at troubleshooting, always start with the simplest solution first. I got 2 funny stories about this one. Number one, when we go in to secure a recently abandoned bank property, I have to change the locks. So this was only the second one we ever did. And my wife and I go in there and I have my drill bit out and I'm drilling out the deadbolt, drilling out the doorknob. It was a pain in the ass. Took a while to do. We finally get into the house. We walk over. Becky's like, hey, did you notice the door on the deck is unlocked? So if I'd have taken 2 minutes to check the other doorknob, I probably would have saved myself a lot of time. Check the simplest solution first. Then, and this is a handyman. Both these are dumb ass mistakes that I made, but I'm going to admit to them. Second one, my daughter moved into a new trailer and she woke up in the middle of the night and said, Dad, there's no heat on in here. And it was minus 35 and it was getting cold quick. I went over, I checked, I couldn't get it to relight. The furnace had no power. I checked the breakers, everything. So I called in the after hours furnace guy. He came in and fixed it. Only charged $100 for coming in the middle of the night, which was awesome. It literally, you know how most all furnaces have one of those shutoff switches right on the wall for like emergency shutoff? Yeah, that's what it was. So if you want to get better at troubleshooting, start with the simplest solution first. Then practice. So no matter what skill it is, plumbing's a big one, right? It can seem, as I was putting this show together, like I've got a lot of experience with plumbing and I love plumbing. It's kind of like a puzzle. But everybody, like, especially when you first start out, it feels overwhelming. But guys, plumbing really doesn't have to be. It's almost all very simple. And if you can break it down into bite-sized steps, and then, hey, Joseph, nice to see you, my friend. Happy Thanksgiving. If you can break it down into manageable steps and, having the material on hand. But the big thing with troubleshooting and trying to figure out some of these solutions is literally practice. So the more we do this, and of course, Ideally, we want to practice in a non-stressful or a less than high stress situation. So you want to practice on things when maybe there's just a small leak, or nobody's home and you have time to tear apart your pump and not worry about the wife needing to do dishes or the baby's needing to have a bath, or practice, but practice in low stress situations. The more you practice, the more you're going to say, oh, okay, I realize here is, a broken point inside of a pressure switch for a pump. And I know what that problem is. And once you start troubleshooting, each time you fix something, you're going to add that to your mental data bank and you're going to be like, okay, now I have an idea. Now I know this could be this, or I've seen this before, so practice. And then here's another one. Trace the problem back to the source, because a lot of times you can see, Joseph will know this on the hotel he's been working on recently or was before, you can have water 2, 3, 4 floors down and you might think, oh, okay, the water's coming out right here. But no, you've got to follow it all the way back. There's a guy on YouTube I watch a lot, and he is a power linesman. And he showed the other night he had a broken neutral. And he's like, well, it could be at the house. Anyway, what he did was he walked and followed the power lines back till he found something where the problem was. And that's a big part of troubleshooting is, okay, I see the problem. It's manifesting itself here. I have water here. It's leaking from here, or at least I'm finding the water here. But you know what? The problem isn't there. I need to follow it back because maybe the water's coming in and running down the pipe. So go all the way back until you find a dry spot. And then okay, I'm making my way. I'm making some headway. I know it's not leaking past this point right here. So yeah, Joseph knows about water. Just asking about the hotel. And then finally, and this is the worst part, and you almost feel like you're cheating, but troubleshooting literally is trial and error. Back when I was fixing computers, that was a huge thing. It was just, of course, you would try the most, what did Sherlock always say, that the most simplest solution is quite often the right one. And that's the case. But, try them the easiest solution, the most typical, the highest, as far as like which one is most common, start with that and then work on there. But you know what? It's totally fine to try something, fail, and then try something else, and then fail again, and then try something else. And that, honestly, that is the art of troubleshooting. Start simple. Seriously, practice. You'll learn more. Trace the problem back to the source. Take your time and follow where it started. Like Joseph says here, he says, one PEX ring failed on the 4th floor, found it coming from the ceiling on the 1st floor. So automatically you're going to think, well, I got a water leak in the 1st floor ceiling. Oh no, follow it back. And, $42,000 in repairs later, a single failure of a single copper PEX ring was all it took. And then trial and error, guys. Just, I hate to use the spaghetti mindset because it's not literally throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. Use your odds, go with the most common problem and solution first, and then eliminate from there. And you'll become a better problem solver and better at troubleshooting, because that's the big thing when we're dealing with any house system. And this will be a concept we're going to revisit week in and week out, because if you become better at troubleshooting in plumbing or in water supply, you're going to become better at sewer work, at heating issues in your home, at exterior issues, all of that. So from here, we're going to deal with, so for me, I decided plumbing is such a big issue, a big topic, that I thought, you know what, we're going to split it up. Tonight, we're going to talk about what comes in, and next week, we're going to talk about what goes out. Next week will be a little crappier, but you know how it is. So tonight we're going to talk about water supply issues, and not even kind of eliminated. I'm going to talk about hot water tanks a bit, but that's going to be a whole nother episode. Man, I don't even know. There's so many episodes we got coming up, and they're going to be awesome. So for me, again, when I talk about preparedness being prevention, I think that the biggest thing is to prepare for the most likely issues to happen, the worst problems you can end up having. So I took the 9 that I see the most often, 9 that most people with a little bit of basic knowledge can fix, and the 9 that are the most obvious, most common thing that could happen to you. So let's work our way through. First one is a bad smell or a bad color in your water. And sometimes it can just be a bad smell. and you're like, oh, that kind of stinks, but you know what? I can still drink it. You might not have a way to test your water. You might not even know, hey, is there something wrong? Isn't there something wrong? But there's always ways to deal with it. When my wife and I bought our very first house, and we had barely a pot to pee in, literally, and we had some issues there we'll talk about another night. We had the water tested. It came back okay. There wasn't really anything seriously wrong with it. And soon after we moved in, it was just an old dug well, went down about 6 feet of water. It was about a maybe 10-foot deep well all the way, and you could barely ever drain it. And all of a sudden we got this coppery smell in our water. It was nasty. Not really sulfur, but copper. And it would stay in the clothes after you washed them, after you dried them. It was awful, to the point where we couldn't drink it. We couldn't bathe in it. We couldn't wash our clothes. We didn't know what to do. So we talked to some experts, and they said, you need a $15,000 reverse osmosis machine to fix that. It'll filter it all out, fix you right up. And Becky and I both looked at ourselves and we're like, well, I don't know where you got 15,000 hiding, because I don't have 15,000 hiding. We need to come up with a lone wolf situation, a solution here, because we don't have the money. We got to do it ourselves. So I got talking to some of the old timers, and they're all like, oh, simple, wash your well. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Anyway, so a dug, now this is only, of course, for dug wells. There's other ways to deal with drilled wells, but if it's an old fashioned dug well with, either rocks or cement culverts going down in the ground, the easiest way is to get yourself a sump pump or a heavy duty pump, drop it down in the well, and pump the well as dry as you can. Now, go down the pump with a ladder and scrub the sides. Spray it down with bleach, wear yourself some protective gear, tie yourself off. Don't do anything you're not comfortable with. But this is a simple way quite often to deal with that. And this was what happened. We kind of disturbed a whole bunch of sediment because the house had been empty for quite a few years. But if you've never cleaned a well, it can be a little intimidating, but it's really not that bad. If you can climb a ladder and you're not scared of enclosed spaces, it's not too bad. Use a nice headlamp, go down there, give it a good scrubbing, add some bleach to the water, run all your taps. And you know what? We ended up fixing it. It was awesome. My brother-in-law had a similar issue, but this is with a drilled well. So if you ever have a really stinky, really nasty kind of smell come out of your drilled well, if you guys have never heard this term before, but you can shock the well. And that is basically dumping 2 or 3 gallons or more, whatever you end up wanting to do, straight down the well of, unscented bleach. You drop that down there, and it almost always will kill whatever the bacteria and nastiness is in that well. Then open up all of your faucets, anything as far as an outlet in the home, and let it run. Flush it out. And that is so simple. And so often people are like, well, we need to pay somebody or we need to drill a new well, or, now if you have a lot of sediment, make sure you put one of those inline filters in. And if you think, Tim, I got to hire somebody to put in an inline filter. No, you really don't. They're super simple. If you can run a hacksaw, you cut into the middle of the water line, and then you just put on 2 compression fittings from there. But make sure you get one of those white ones that looks like a roll of paper towel, and find the one that's going to suck all that sediment out. It's going to end up saving everything else in the house, and it's going to prevent some of the other issues that we're going to talk about later on. Charlotte says she remembers when we shocked the pool, it was nasty. And you know what? Same kind of concept. It basically knocks all the nasty crap out of the water, makes it a little bit more solid, and then allows it to pump up and get out of there. It kind of is like, open heart surgery for the well, but it really works. So, what do we keep? What do we need? Almost everybody has a good sump pump or some kind of utility pump you can drop down in. I just picked up one from Amazon recently that I'm going to use for pumping out our hot tub, and it looks like it should work really well. But, the faster and the bigger volume of pump, the better, because this old dug well of ours, you could barely pump it dry. The thing would stay almost level at 6 feet all the time. So something to, take a look at. And also, if you have a bit of a smell, sometimes just installing an inline charcoal filter will be enough to get rid of that. But so kind of a nasty color, nasty smell, that's the first one. So then the next one, this is the big one. This is a pump issue. And again, a lot of this, of course, is going to be geared toward people living in the country, homesteaders. Now, it doesn't mean that a lot of this doesn't pertain to us city folk as well. But of course, pumps and that, when we don't have water, we panic, right? Because what do they say? 3 days without water and you're you're in some serious world hurt at that point. And, if either help isn't around the corner or you don't have the money to fix something, when your pump is acting up, I remember the absolute sheer panic we used to have when we had problems with the pump. So the first house wouldn't be the first one we lived in as a married couple, but one of the first ones. And we'd rented it from somebody who lived out of the country and didn't care to take care of the place at all. And we had a jet pump. That's one of those little, kind of looks like a tabletop pump, has a little nozzle that comes out of it. And they work for a drilled well that isn't too deep. And this thing was old. And the main guts of what turns your pump on and off is called a pressure switch. I knew nothing about this. And one night we were getting ready to do baths for the babies, and the pump just died. Made a funny smell and it died. And I thought, oh my God, honey, we can't afford a new pump. So again, remember when you guys asked me what my motivation was for learning all this? It was abject poverty at one time and absolute desperation, to the point where we didn't have any of this stuff to be able to afford to hire someone. So I had to turn around and figure it all out myself. So pump issues. Like I said, there's three main types of pumps. The jet pumps, those are the little ones that sit on a table. They kind of come to a point. They work for dug wells and, medium depth drilled wells. And then, hey, Ted, nice to see you, buddy. And then there's the deep well pumps. They look like a long piston for those who are on the video feed. They're just a long column. They fit right down into the very bottom of your drilled well. And then there's an old style piston pump. And those are the workhorses. We had one of those in the first house we bought. And they have a pulley system on them. And they take an old V-belt and they make a clug, 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 clug noise like an old train taking off. And they're great because you can barely kill them. And trust me, we tried. But anyway, so the house we lived in had a jet pump. And the most common issue on those is the small little gray box that is the turn off, turn off. It's the turn on, turn off. It has the cut in and cut out pressure set for your pump. So I thought, I don't know what to do. But I knew this guy I went to school with. He'd moved back to town. He was an old stoner, and he was kind of an unofficial plumber. So I called him. He's like, oh, he says, you got a screwdriver? I said, yep. He says, okay, go downstairs. Yep. Take the cap off the gray plastic box for your pressure switch. He said, and stick a screwdriver in between those points. I said, are you sure? He goes, yep. And I stuck it in there, and I got kind of a little shock and a little spark, and the pump kicked right on. What happens with those is they get worn out, they get sticky, they get a lot of electricity going through them, and they end up sticking quite bad. And so, you can spray them with WD-40 or my favorite fluid film to free them up a little bit. Sometimes, he said the first time, he said, try this. He said, just tap the side of it with a screwdriver and see what happens. And sometimes that's enough to get those points moving. But once they start going, they can be an issue. So if you're, make sure it's a grounded screwdriver, stick it in there, wiggle it around a little, and quite often you can bring your pump back to life. Super simple. That's something that people don't always think about, but you need to keep one of those pressure switches on hand because that is the single most common issue that goes on any pump, and all of them have it. Piston pump, deep well pump, and jet pumps all keep those pressure switches. So have one of those on hand for sure. Now, in a pinch, you can take a nail file and file those points down. Say you can't get to the store for a month or something. And a lot of times, and I don't want to give you bad advice here, but a lot of times you can limp those pressure switches for a long time, but be careful. Number two with pumps, the next big thing is the control box or the pump switch, they call it. And it just looks like a gray electrical box that mounts to the side, somewhere near the pump. And it basically just kind of has a top piece. You pull it out and it has all the electrical connections in there. They're really susceptible to wearing out and lightning strikes. There's a reset switch underneath of them. You can always try those. But, and something I did tonight, I put together a collected playlist of 5 to 10 minute videos I found around the internet that showed each and every one of these issues we're talking about and how literally simple they are. Every one of these is less than 10 minutes. So you can watch it once, twice, 3 times, whatever, and you'll learn how to fix this stuff. But like I said, first one's the pressure switch. The next one is the power box, the pump switch, whatever you want to call it. Check the reset switch and then learn how to change them out. If you can use a screwdriver to change a few wires, you can do it. Now, number 3, when it comes to pumps, most have a pressure tank nowadays. So you're going to notice, say you just bought your property and you got a pump there. Sitting next to it is going to be either a blue, a gray, or a cream colored tank. You know, it could be 20 gallons or bigger. It kind of looks like a small version of a hot water tank. And that is basically, it's simple. It's a reservoir of water, but it helps regulate your pressure. So if you didn't have that, your water pressure is going to go up when the pump's on and then slowly down when the pump's off. And so it's going to cycle up and down. And when you open up your taps, you're going to notice the water is going to go back and forth, right? So that pressure tank is designed to even the flow of your water out, and it has a bladder in it. So if you notice that your water is starting to, cut in, cut out more, like you still have water, but your pressure's up and down, there's a good chance that the inside of that pressure tank has ruptured. Do not panic. It's not a big deal. You don't even need a pressure tank, but pressure tanks are handy. Lots of people like to have them. But you can check on the top, there's a little nipple that looks just like a valve stem off of a car tire, right? And so if you take and push a nail down in there, if water squirts out at you, you know that pressure tank's hooped. You can't fix that. You need to replace it. But you don't have to. It just means your water is going to cycle up and down a fair bit more, and it's going to act a little bit strange. So if you need to limp along for 2, 3, 4 weeks on a dead pressure tank, not going to hurt you. So, simple, quite easy. And then, of course, sometimes if you have a drilled well that goes way down, or even a dug well, on the very end, there's going to be a foot valve with a check valve built in. It's kind of like a little filter, and it allows the water not to fall back down the water column once it's pumped up. And sometimes those break off, they blow off, and you might need to replace them. But as far as pump issues, we all want to have a list of items that we'd love to have on hand just in case. Because us preppers, we like to have gear and we like to have lists. So for pump issues, keep a check valve on hand, keep a control box on hand, keep a pressure switch on hand. Now this one's going to seem strange, but if you have a drilled well, the one that goes down 2, 3, 4, 500 feet, whatever it is, when you put that pump down there, yes, it's going to have a water line attached to it. Yes, it's going to have electrical attached to it, but you want to tie it off with a good quality rope that isn't UV sensitive. So something that can sit out in the weather for years on end, because the last thing you want to end up doing is trying to pull a pump out of a well and all of a sudden you realize that the water lines broke off and the only thing you've got to pull that up by is those 4 electrical wires that are attached to that pump. And you are hoping and praying that you don't drop that pump, because that's a $400 to $800 pump. If it breaks off, there's no fishing it out. And if you want to get real extreme, keep an extra pump on hand too and learn how to change that out. Because honestly, if we want to be completely as self-sufficient as we can be and as off-grid as we can be, an extra pump would be awesome, especially if it's a jet pump, because they're not super expensive compared to some of the other ones. But honestly, if it's in the budget down the road, once you've got one extra of each of those pieces, grab yourself an extra pump and you should be good to go. Number 3, water line issues. So from here, first off, I want to give you a little disclaimer. So if you're ever going to dig anywhere in your home and you have any concerns that there's electrical or gas lines or anything buried, call line locators. Just about anywhere you live, it's totally free and they can save your neck, literally. So here's the big thing. If you got a well out in your backyard somewhere, whatever, right? And it has to run into your home, there's going to be a water line that runs underground from your pump to your house. Now, quite often, either through frost or rocks that are down there or whatever happens, sometimes your water line is going to spring a leak. It might be a fitting that lets go. It might be just literally a crack that develops in the pipe. Now, you can call somebody and have them come out with a mini excavator and dig it out and charge you an arm and a leg. But again, what is Repairedness? The art of home maintenance when help isn't around the corner. So we got to solve this ourselves. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to walk the area between the home and the well. And we're going to look for somewhere where we get our feet wet. Something squishy. You're going to, if you're lucky enough, you're going to actually see bubbles coming up from the ground. But if you can find a spot where the water's pooling, there's a really good chance that's where the crack in your line is. So then you're going to dig down, and of course there's going to be water in there. So shut your pump off first, make sure there's no water, then dig down and get a small little utility pump that water out of there, and then start looking then you can turn your water back on and see where that water is coming from. Now, if you dig down and you didn't find the crack, but you see one side's wet and the other side, Chicken Hawk bought a towable backhoe just for this. It's awesome and a really cool tool. Who doesn't want to have a towable backhoe? So if you dig down, and most times, it's 3 or 4 feet, anybody can dig that by hand, especially, if this is a weekend or a holiday, you got to do it. Say Thanksgiving, you don't want to call a plumber in, right? So if you dig down, start paying attention to which side of the hole is wetter. Kind of might sound funny, but so if one side's sopping wet and the other side's just kind of a little bit damp, then you know that you need to go toward the sopping wet side. So if you didn't find it the first time, just keep digging into the muddier side, get down there, and then find yourself your crack, your plumbing fitting that let go, whatever it happens to be. But again, water's life. And if we don't have water, we're going to be stressed out and we're going to be having a bad day. Get down there. Again, I know I say almost every plumbing problem seems to be able to be solved with a hacksaw, but you want to keep some fittings on hand. You want to find out what size water line you keep. You want to find out what size water line was installed if you can, and then keep an amount of fittings on hand. The big one you want to have is a bunch of couplings or joiners, and you just cut the bad piece out. Now, if it's just a tiny piece, you should be able to cut it out, put a joiner in, 2 hose clamps. I would put 4, 2 on either side, because you're burying this fitting at this point, because you don't want to have to replace the entire water line. That's a story for another day. Go down there, tighten everything up, turn your water back on, and maybe even leave it exposed for a day or two just to make sure you're not going to have any more issues. But it's really that simple. Dig down, find the crack, cut it out, put a fitting in, tighten it down. Bob's your uncle. You're all set. But honestly, that's the big one. Now, the other one could be that you have a broken or blown off fitting down your well. And we talked about that a bit. But, if you have a jet pump in your basement, well, it's just as simple as pulling your water line up. That's not too big of a deal. But if you have a deep well pump, then you're going to have to pull your pump, and you're going to have to find what fitting let go. Keep some elbows, some T's, and a whole bunch of pressure clamps, hose clamps, because they are cheap insurance to keep your fittings put together and your well running and your water system going. But that's it. Now, what should you keep on hand? Again, fittings. And make sure you know the size. Have a good selection of fittings. They're cheap. They're like 79 cents a fitting, those poly water line fittings. Keep a whole bunch of hose clamps on hand, and then keep enough water line on hand just in case you have to replace the entire thing. And that means not just from the well to the house, but from the well to the house and down the well. Make sure you have enough of that. That stuff's cheap. You can buy 500-foot rolls if you have to. But again, start with your budget. Look at what you think is the most likely thing to happen, and then go from there. Now, some of these preventative maintenance, walk the area and look occasionally, even if you're not having water issues, once a month or once every 3 months, walk the area between your house and your well and look for wet spots, right? Now, if you have a jet pump, use your ears, listen to the thing. If it's cutting in and cutting out often, or cutting in and cutting out when you're not running water, you got a problem. You're either losing water back down the hole, or you have a leak somewhere. So that's the type of stuff that you can pay attention to ahead of time, just in case you end up, finding a problem. It's like, oh, you know what? There's a wet spot here. I think it's time we dig this up. Let's fix it before it gets real bad, right? So from there, how about the next one? This is a good one. And these are kind of the overall title is broken shutoff. So if you have a main, everybody, and maybe I should have mentioned this before, but you guys probably know this stuff, but everybody should know where your main water shutoff is, just in case there's an emergency. However, what do you do if your main shutoff isn't working? And this is a weird one. This is one that makes you uncomfortable. This is one when you go in the basement and you go to turn your water main off and the thing just spins in your hands, or it doesn't turn at all, or it falls off in your hands. You're like, I'm not having a very good day. So there's really 3 things you can do. And another quick story, because I love stories, but we look after property management. And one night, the wife and I were getting ready to head out of town for a really nice meal. And all of a sudden, I get a call from a tenant who was very frenzied and worked up, said, "I got water coming in my basement. Can you come fix it?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's my job. I'll be there." So I go over, and it was Friday night about 6 o'clock. So the town guys had already gone home. This was a town property. And yeah, there was water coming in. And it was just after the shutoff, the main shutoff to the home, but the shutoff wasn't working. So I had to get the guys in from the town to shut the water off. And of course, it was an after hours call, which there's always somebody on call, but I had to get it turned off. So if you live in town, first thing you need to know is make sure you have the emergency contact for whoever is the person that will come out and turn off your water. Now, another little thing is look at the wrench they use, because you might be able to make something like that or buy something like that, or maybe, sometimes these guys will lend them to me if I'm going to need it on the weekend to turn the water back on or turn the water off to a house. That's just something to know, right? Now, if you live out in the country, just turn the power off to your pump and you're all set. But that still doesn't solve your issue of, holy crap, my main water line, and I can't shut it off. What do I do? Because yeah, if I turn my pump back on, the water's still going to gush out. So there's 3 issues. Number 1 is seized. You go to turn that on and off, and it doesn't turn. That's a bigger issue with what they call a gate valve. That looks like the old-fashioned style, like the handle you have on an exterior tap to your home. Those are miserable. Don't ever use a damn gate valve. Change every valve in your house out for a ball valve, a quarter-turn ball valve, because they're reliable. They don't seize. Well, they usually don't. They definitely don't break off nearly as easy, and they're just reliable. So if something's seized, the first thing you want to do is spray it with some sort of penetrating oil. So again, there's another thing we can have on hand is some penetrating oil. WD-40 makes some good stuff. There's a ton of brands out there, but spray it with penetrating oil, let it sit for a while, then try to work it back and forth. Sometimes, be careful, you can put a monkey wrench, or yeah, Ted agrees, gate valves are terrible. Yes, I mean, they were when they were the only thing out there, I guess they were great. It's kind of like a slot screwdriver. When all you know is a slot screwdriver, it's going to be awesome. But once you've used a Robertson or a Phillips or a Torx, all of a sudden you're like, that's not very good, is it? So spray it with penetrating oil, let it sit for a while, then work them back and forth. If you're going to use a pipe wrench on the handle, go gently. It takes very little to break those off, but most times they're just seized up. And if you let it spray it in there and then work it back and forth, the handle, turn it to the right, to the left, eventually it might free up if you're lucky. But if it starts seizing up like that, sometimes it just stays seized and you can't do anything about it. So you got to cut it out, and we'll deal with that. The second one, of course, is when you go to turn it off and surprise, the handle breaks off right in your hand. So that's another one. It's like, okay, well, the first one was seized, and sometimes the broken one, hey, Mr. Arcade, how are you, sir? Nice to see you. So sometimes the handle can break off in your hand, and that really sucks as well. But it's kind of the same symptom of the same problem. It might have been seized and it just came off. So in that instance, if it wasn't, you can use vice grips or sometimes some pliers and grab whatever happens to be left of that shut off, because the main thing is to get it shut off for right now. So one thing you can do is, once you get that shut off, if the vice grips will grab it, is just above that, cut in and put in a nice new quarter turn ball valve. Then open up that old valve and forget about it. Leave it open forever from there. But like I said, whatever the solution is, put in a quarter turn ball valve. And then the third one's a stripped handle. Those are fun because, and this is the worst thing about those old gate valves, is sometimes the handle gets stripped and you think you're shutting it off, and all you're doing is turning the handle, and you turn, and you go up and you cut into the water line, and you all of a sudden got a whole bunch of water coming to you. And these are 3 symptoms of the same thing, but these are all the main shut off for the house. So yeah, that's where you go. Now, the big thing, of course, preventative maintenance can solve a lot of these issues, because those old gate valves hate to just sit there. I mean, they love to stay in a state of stasis. Say that 10 times fast. Anyway, so if they're open, they love to stay open. If they're closed, they want to stay closed. So one thing you can do is go around every year and spray each of those gate valves with a little bit of penetrating oil, and then turn them off and on a few times, or spray them with a little bit of anti-seize, something like that. That's the best way to make sure that a valve is going to work when you need it to. It's just like running your generator, run it a little bit here and there, every 3 months or so that it's up and ready to go and it's not in a bad way. But, more than that, even if you do have one, figure out a good spot right near there, shut your water off, cut into your water line. I love shark bite fittings. We're going to talk about them a little bit later. Cut into the water line, grab yourself a shark bite quarter turn ball valve, snap it on either end of the copper pipe, and you are done. That's it. And those, you need to have them on hand for sure. And if you live in town with municipal water, and I never said this for sure, I don't have one. I'd love to get one at some point, but if you can get one of those municipal tools that will turn the water on and off, that may just save your hide sometime. Ted says, if you got a gate valve, use it so it doesn't get stuck. Yes, that's the worst thing with those. That's what I love about a ball valve is they can sit there for 100 years, and for the most part, they'll still turn. But the gate valves, if they sit there, you might as well forget about it. And of course, in the basements, things are always damp and humid and getting all, seized up and corroded and all that. And they just didn't seem to be made very well. So get rid of gate valves if at all possible. This is a huge item on the preventative end of things. So if you're looking for something to do, you're like, Tim, I need one thing to spend money on as far as plumbing goes. Everything else is good in my house. I'd say get rid of every friggin' gate valve in the house. Just my opinion. Number 5, this is a super common one, a pinhole or a burst pipe. So basically you got a leak somewhere in the pipe. And this is something that most people see and they panic. They're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what do I do? Where do I go? I got water coming out. Well, first thing you do is take a breath, slap yourself across the face like it's an 80s sitcom. Well, no, don't really do that. But, and then go and shut off your main water supply. That's literally what you need to do. Then you can solve the issue from there. I got a call a couple of years ago from a customer, and I showed up at their house. Turned out it was the wrong one. I had 2 customers with the same name. So anyway, I went to their home. For 36 hours, they'd been away. It was just a pinhole of a stream of water coming out, and they ended up having about an inch of water in their basement. And they had a side hustle where they sold scrapbooking supplies, and it just wrecked everything. It was like a $10,000 insurance claim when it was all said and done. And that was just an inch of water. The remediation company had to come in with fans and the whole works. So it's always something to look for. First off, I would say this is the area preventative maintenance is huge. Go around, walk your basement. If you have copper, first off, it notoriously gets thin over time. So look for areas that might have green or white buildup, maybe some rust or maybe some dampness on the pipe, or look for some wet spots on the ground that have dried, or even worse, look for drips coming from your pipe. And if you see that kind of shit, fix it now, because the last thing you want to do is being away for a nice weekend away with the missus or the mister, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I come home, your night's ruined, your insurance premiums are going to go through the roof. So fix that before you can. Again, this is what shark bite fittings are great for. If you haven't seen them, they're basically a brass fitting with 2 quick release couplings on either end. They're idiot proof, and that's saying a lot because I've used them. So, but basically, and this works for, whether it's a pinhole leak or a big rupture in a pipe. Cut the section out, and if it's just tiny, if it's just a little tiny crack, then you can just pop those shark bite fittings in and you're done. Literally a 3-minute fix to have a $15 part on hand. Now, if you have a ton of plumbing to do, don't do it with shark bite fittings because they're expensive. They're cheap insurance to keep 2 or 3 on hand, but don't plumb a whole damn house with it. Get yourself, and this is time, Ted, you can be embarrassed for me. Handyman confession time. I don't know how to solder. Never learned how to solder. I really should learn how to solder. However, with the advent of PEX, since I've been in the handyman business, I bought a $50 PEX crimping tool. I keep a full selection of plastic PEX pipe and the fittings on hand, and you can fix anything. Between that and, the shark bite fittings, they fit on both PEX and copper pipe. They are a prepper's dream, literally, because they allow you to fix anything. So keep, a couple of ball valves on hand, some couplings, maybe a couple of T's, and a cap. Caps are good for, an absolutely simple situation, the caps will just shut it off for you. And that's okay. Katie says over in the EOC, can't catch the live show tonight. Look forward to the podcast tomorrow. No worries, Katie. I'm the one that went and, booked this show on Turkey Day. So sorry about that, guys. But we have a great crowd in here tonight. So this is awesome. So keep some shark bite fittings. Again, my favorite hacksaw or a pipe cutter. You don't have to have a hacksaw. I just love having a hacksaw because it's such a versatile tool. And then there's these little orange C tools that you can pick up that basically allow you to remove any and all shark bite fittings. And while we're going here, Chris had a question. What's the new line since PEX? I had to upgrade to it when I changed my kitchen taps. You know what? I honestly haven't run into it. There's, Ted says shark bites are great in emergencies. I've been bad about bringing up your chats up here on the screen tonight, guys. So sorry about that. So there's CPVC, but that's about the same age as PEX. If there's something other than PEX, there's Polypex. Sometimes it just has different brand names. I'll look into it, Chris, and find out for you because I'm not familiar with anything other than PEX at this point. Shark bite have become, synonymous. They're basically everywhere, and they work with the older CPVC. They work with copper, and they work with PEX. But I'm not sure. I'll look it up and I'll send you a message if I can remember. And like Ted says, yeah, shark bites are great in emergencies. And we're not talking about, the type you get when you're out swimming in the Florida Ocean where Ted lives, but these are just those fittings and they do work really, really good. And then, maybe have a couple of fans on hand and a sump pump. This is, worst case scenario, but if you ever do have a flood or some damage, you might need to be able to clean that up, especially if it's a post-flood situation and it wasn't due to plumbing, but it's really good to have that kind of stuff on hand. So next, leaking faucets. My daughter has one at her rental right now. The last place we lived in before we bought this house, I opened up the kitchen cupboards underneath the sink. It had a funny smell. I tore up the floor that was in there, and there was mushrooms and mold growing down there. And that was simply from a leaking faucet that was working its way down. It was up under the supply line. So if you've never fixed a leaking faucet, if you can use a wrench, it's pretty simple. But what do we want to keep on hand? If you know the type of faucet you have, every faucet has a stem inside, and that is the piece that turns back and forth underneath the handle. So find out what your brand is and get yourself, true story, if you go into a lot of smaller hardware stores, if it happens to be, say, like a Moen or a Eurostream, any of those taps that have a lifetime warranty, and if you go in there and say, hey, do you keep these extra stems on hand for warranty claims? A lot of times they'll give you a left and a right hand one just to have on hand. And if they don't, buy a couple from them or order some on Amazon. But have a couple of stems on hand because eventually your taps are going to start springing a leak and you need to learn how to do that. Screwdriver, take the handle off. Super simple. And then the other way that a tap is going to leak is up underneath. So first it's on top and you're going to have those two stems you can replace. And the much more difficult is the water lines or what they call the supply lines. So have you ever looked underneath your kitchen sink, bathroom sink, you see those steel braided lines. And those are what they call supply lines. And a lot of times, over time, they'll spring a little leak and start dripping, and you may not even notice it. So first off, make sure you keep the area under your sink somewhat, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but somewhat open, because if it's full of stuff, you might not notice for months that you've got a leak until all of a sudden you go to pull, say, all the shampoo or the grocery bags out, and everything's soaked and it smells like mold. And all of a sudden you got a hole in the floor because it rotted through. So, regular inspections are honestly the biggest, the easiest preventative maintenance that a person can do. And so much of this is prevention and never, if we can prevent a problem and never have to fix it, how much better is that? Now, here's another Life Pro tip, and I'm sure Ted will agree with me on this one. Install a shutoff valve for every single fixture in the home. I've gone into some to work where the only shutoff in the damn house is the main shutoff. And you know what? If you only have one, well, of course, that's the place to have it. But if you're in the bathroom and all of a sudden your taps spring a huge leak and you got water going everywhere, how much easier is it to just shut it off underneath? So if you ever have to remove those water lines and somebody didn't put on a shutoff, put one of those on. And then what's Chris say? We put everything in baskets and then on a towel and then check the towel weekly. That's great. I love that. Yeah. So then you're going to see, okay, well, if the towel's a little bit wet, you know you have a problem. That is dead simple. I like that a lot. So yeah, back to the water lines. Make sure you put in, again, my favorite little quarter turn ball valves, but they make those little chrome. They look fancy. Have one for your toilet, have one for your kitchen sink, have one for your bathroom sink. Everywhere you have a fixture installed, make sure you install a shutoff. And then that makes fixing problems easier. It makes it a sectional issue, so you don't have to shut off the whole house just to fix a set of taps. And it allows your reaction time to be able to fix it just like that. It's like labeling your electrical panel. If you know what circuit you need to turn off, you only got to turn that one off, and you can do it quicker than, maybe needing to find the whole main or running somewhere to do it. Okay, now we're not going to talk about the stuff that goes into the toilet. We're just going to talk about the stuff that comes up to feed the toilet tonight. Because again, this is just water supply issues. But yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's talk about this for a minute, guys. Ted says never completely trust any shutoff. Tim hinted at that earlier. Yeah. So this is a good point that I didn't actually have in my notes, and I've dealt with this a lot. So it's just like never fully trust a breaker, even if, or never trust an electrical tester. But, even if you've turned your electrical off, it's still prudent to use an insulated screwdriver to do the work, because there's always a chance that just because you think you shut off the right one, you didn't. Now, here is a story. I had installed a new set of taps underneath my kitchen. They're only a year old, and I needed to change the water lines out. And I went down there and I did what I thought. It was a quarter turn to the right to turn off the water valve. I turned it off. I went back up. I turned on the kitchen taps and water came out because that brand new quarter turn ball valve, it was a cheap one, was stripped right from the factory. So yes, just because you think you have a shutoff turned off, test it. Test it low and slow and be careful, Don't go up and turn the water on or make a huge cut into a water line without making sure with your own eyes that the water is actually turned off. Yes, never fully trust a shutoff. That is, yeah, we got to remember. I'll remember that, Ted. We'll add that to the show notes for afterwards. So now toilet. This is the water coming in. And of course, if we don't have a toilet, we have problems, right? But again, leaking supply line. And to back up real quick to the set of things to keep on hand for fixing sinks, shutoffs, water supply lines, faucet valve stems, and a really cool tool, if you've never seen it before, a basin wrench. And they look like basically just this long kind of weird pipe wrench type thing that looks like a T. And they're really handy because the worst thing you can ever do is to try to take off water lines that are seized onto a set of bathroom taps up inside. I mean, I'm a big dude and I got to turn and twist and contort my body and hold my tongue the right way and get right in there. And it sucks. And I still can't get my hand up in there. So get yourself, if you're ever looking at it, you ever think you're gonna have to do much of this, get yourself a basin wrench. Google it. They're awesome. They work so good. If I can find a recommendation, I'll put a link, an Amazon link into my show notes tonight, guys, because they're a lifesaver and they're really not that expensive anymore. All right. So toilets, leaking supply line. That's the same as a leaking line for sinks as well. Nothing serious, but something you might run into, maybe not too often, but again, it's a water issue so not everybody realizes it. Well, you probably should, but the tank and the bowl of a toilet are two different pieces on most toilets. And in between there's a gasket. It's not a wax gasket, but it's a foam gasket. And sometimes over time that can break down and you start getting a leak there. You start getting water down around the toilet bowl. You got to take a look and say, okay, that's what it is. So keep one of those on hand. Find out, they're basically universal. Keep a couple of them on hand, have a set of bolts. And then inside the toilet, there's usually a couple things that happen. Most recently I had to go to a rental because the toilet would run all the time. And there's a part in there that has a really funny name. I'm not talking about somebody who talks all the time, but it's called a universal flapper. And inside, it's basically a rubber piece that opens and closes on a chain. And after a while, they get twisted or warped or cracked or worn out. And you're going to hear your toilet run constantly. And if you do, that needs to be replaced because they can't really be adjusted per se. If they've worn out, you need to replace it. So keep a universal flapper on hand. If you have a toilet, know the guts inside your toilet, look at the things, and then order yourself a new, float system, and then get yourself a universal handle kit as well, because this happens a lot. And the handle will break off. Now, a lot of people don't know this. You guys are probably fairly smart and you probably know this, but in a pinch, if you need to flush your toilet and your handle broke off, take the back off the toilet, the tank cover, and reach down inside, and the chain that broke off, just grab it and pull it up, and you can flush your toilet that way. You can even just run fresh water. If you have a bucket full of water, dump it down into the bowl, and that extra water will flush the whole toilet down for you. Ted says, the rubber washers on the tank bolts I've had a lot of problems with lately. I'm scared to death. So when you put that tank to bowl setup back together, you have to tighten both those bolts down. And I'm always scared to death I'm going to crack that tank. I haven't done it yet, but not everything's Tim proof. But yeah, just keep an eye on that for sure. Chris says you might have to move the beer cans first in the back of the toilet. Yeah, I get that. I like that. There used to be an old way that the old timers, back when the toilets used to take 13-liter flushes. What would that be? 13 liters, 4 gallons or something like that. Yeah, I think that's right. Anyway, they would put like a brick or something down inside the tank, just basically to displace some of the water so that you weren't using so much. Now the new 2 and 6 liter flushes are a lot better, and they use a lot less water and they flush just as good. So, preventative, again, look for leaks. If you got some water on the floor, it's coming from somewhere. Don't ignore it, because you're going to end up like my parents' old bathroom at the home where I grew up. I stepped on the area between the toilet and the tub one night, and my foot went through the floor because we had ignored a leak there for way too long, and it got rotten, and then we had to fix the floor, or at least board it up for a while. So look for leaks, and then occasionally look inside your tank. Look and see if it's having any buildup. If it looks like anything's cracked, anything looks out of the ordinary, just do an inspection. Half the time just looking at things. Now, if you do this, say once a month or once every 3 months, eventually you're going to notice something out of the ordinary. You're going to look and say, oh, okay, this is good. This is good. Oh no, look, that's bent or broken or it's stretched, or look, and replace things. If they start to look out of place, replace them. Like I said, what do we keep on hand? That thing that talks a lot, the universal flapper, extra shutoff, extra supply line, the float assembly for in the back of the toilet. All of these things are, half-hour jobs that you can learn in 10 minutes on YouTube. So don't be discouraged. Don't be scared. Don't be anxious. You guys can do it. I promise. Absolutely. We got 2 more, guys. Before I started, I thought, man, we might have to cut this into a 2-episode series, but we're going to make it tonight. And I'm not going to rush. We got all the time. And, if people need to shut it off and start over later on, go for it. Chris says hard water is hard on toilets. We just replaced a toilet that was mostly plugged with calcium buildup. And I don't know if that's an Alberta thing or out here thing or whatever, but man, we have a shit ton of calcium too, like crazy. And yes, it is super hard. Some filters will take it out, some won't, but you're always fighting with getting that calcium cleaned up and off things. Cause it like you said, it eats the guts of the toilet. It, makes things brittle. It's just nasty. Ted has a hack here. Drop some food coloring in the tank and see if it shows up in your bowl. If so, you got water leaking past your flapper. That's a great tip, Ted. Ted the tipper tonight. This is good. Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, put some food coloring in your tank and just let it sit there. And if your water stays clear in the bowl, you don't have a flapper issue. I like that. Thank you, Ted. So next one, and this one isn't a full-on emergency, but it's common enough that I thought, we need to share this, but it's low water pressure. And that can manifest itself in a whole house issue or an individual fixture by fixture issue. First thing you got to look at, and this happens a lot out here as well, but if say it's just your sinks, everybody knows where the water comes out of the faucet. Up in there, most of those you can screw off, and inside is what they call an aerator. It gives you kind of a nice constant flow, but the whole idea is it's an environmental thing to save water. You can haul that thing. First off, take it out, clean it out, rinse it out, and a lot of times that'll give you better flow. But if you want to eliminate it altogether, I'm not going to stop you. Now, shower heads are a little bit different. Like Chris was talking about, calcium's really bad for this kind of thing. In a pinch, you can use vinegar, but I love, and when I say love, I mean love CLR. So if you guys have that CLR, calcium lime rust remover, that is the cat's ass when it comes to cleaning this stuff. Take your shower head off, put it in a container, cover it with just enough CLR, and let it sit for 2-3 hours. And you'll start seeing all that debris bubble up and float off. And when you're done, you got a perfectly well-running shower head. But what happens if you have low pressure in the whole house, or at least on all your hot water lines? And that can be a clogged up hot water tank. Now, we're not going to talk about hot water tanks a lot tonight, but if you have a lot of sediment in your house, do what I said before. Preventative maintenance. Install a sediment filter. Now, there's 2 types. The black ones are charcoal. That is for smell or discoloration in the water, mainly smell. It gets rid of funky smells. The one you want, again, is the one that looks like a roll of toilet paper or paper towel, and it's white and it filters out the junk. And that's going to keep, that's your sacrificial lamb that's going to sit there and suck in all that dirt so that it doesn't make it in to your hot water tank, to your water lines, to your toilet, clog up all your fixtures and make your life miserable. However, if your hot water tank does get full of dirt, debris, and sediment, it's a pretty easy process to flush that out. We're going to talk about that more when we talk about hot water. Ted says have to have a set of aerator keys now for all these different brands of faucets. Yep. Yeah, it used to be that used to be simple. The potheads used to come in to Home Hardware where I worked, and you'd know they'd been in there when they opened up all of our display faucets and stole the screens out of them so they could use them in their, I don't know if it's their pipes or their bongs or whatever, but every one of them was the same. You just knew they were little tiny pieces of screen. But now most of them are plastic and they're just weird anyway. But so what do you need to keep on hand for that? Well, preventative maintenance first. Like I said, install an inline filter and periodically flush your hot water tank. Those are the 2 things you can do that are going to save you a ton of time, but also keep some CLR on hand, keep some aerators on hand, and keep an extra, you might even need to keep an extra set of taps and an extra shower head, because eventually that stuff gets in there and it just breaks down, and all of a sudden you've got either a shower head that doesn't work properly or it sprays all over the place. You don't want that. So just keep an eye on it, learn how to fix it. That is a simple one. And then the number 9, this is one that Ted deals with all the time in Florida, and that is frozen water lines. So there's so many issues. Up here, we deal with it all the time, right? And when it gets to -40, a big issue is in the mobile homes. The water, within minutes will freeze or. So my daughter lives in a mobile home. But she, before she lived in there, it was a property that I took care of, and there was a young couple living in there, and they were gone for the weekend. Something happened. The water lines froze, but they didn't just freeze a little bit. They were gone long enough that the water lines froze for a long section. We couldn't get them thawed out, had to put them up in a hotel for like a week until it warmed up and we could get things thawed out. Basically, their entire plumbing system froze. It really, really sucked. Now, normally, if you catch it early on, you're only going to have a small section that's frozen. If you have an infrared thermometer or a thermometer gun, you can point at the line, follow it along, and find the spot that hits 0 or 32. Wherever it's the coldest spot, that is where you're going to concentrate your heat. Now, when I first started, I didn't have an infrared thermometer. I didn't even have a heat gun. I just used a blow dryer. And why do I own a blow dryer? Because I have no hair. I don't really know, but I have girls in the house and they need that, right? But so in a pinch, will a blow dryer work? Yeah. The problem is that it's a lot of guesswork. So if you do live in an area that's prone to frozen pipes, it's probably worth investing in a heat gun and an infrared thermometer. And neither of them are very expensive. You can buy no-name ones of those, but it makes your life so much easier. A few things you can do ahead of time in the fall, go around the outside of your home and look for any areas there might be gaps, because that is where something's going to freeze. If you find an area where air can infiltrate, that is where it's going to work its way in. And that's the area that's going to freeze the quickest. So first off, first line of defense, go around, plug those areas, fill them in, make sure that the cold air can't get through. That's number one. In areas that tend to freeze, heat tape, if you guys aren't familiar with it, is really cool. It's basically a long extension cord that you tape to your water lines. They plug in. They always have a lit end on them so you can tell they're working, which is super good. Again, preventative maintenance, go around in the fall, test them, make sure they're all lighting up and all working. Also, insulate the hell out of those pipes. So one trick we do out here quite often is put the heat tape on, then insulate. If you're really concerned, put the heat tape on, then put the black foam insulation, then wrap the entire thing in double bubble foil insulation, and then cover that entire thing with tuck tape from there. All of that. It works really well. Now, the downside to that is if your heat tape ever goes, it is a pain in the ass to cut everything off and replace it. But sometimes that's just what you need to do. Now, life pro tip, if you live in an area where it's cold and it's getting really cold at night, and your pipes are a little bit prone to freezing, something you can do is turn on a faucet. The best thing is to turn on a faucet as far away from the water supply as you can. Now, I don't mean let it run like crazy, but let it drip through the night. And just now, if you live in a warmer area and say you have a power outage or something, and you're going to get below freezing for a night or two, that can be just enough to save you. Turn your taps on a bit, let them drip, and it can keep the water flowing just enough that it doesn't freeze solid and rupture your pipes. That might be all it takes sometimes. And you know what? If you have to let it go and everything ends up freezing, well, then we'll use our shark bite fittings and fix out the ruptures after it happens. And you know what? In an absolute pinch, sometimes you could hook up a temporary water line. I don't love this idea, but if everything's frozen and you can't do anything else, sometimes you can hook up an above ground temporary water line. You need to put a check valve in it. You need to make sure it's all going to run back, and you need to make sure it's going to keep running for a while. But yeah, if you need to, set up a temporary pump and water line, try to insulate it. But when it's that cold, it's an absolute fight all the time. So that's the 9. I had one other thing I wanted to kind of talk about so all of these situations are really bad. Some are worse than others. Ted says, if it freezes down here, I'll be feeling really sorry for you, Tim. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be some kind of polar vortex. You remember that Day After Tomorrow movie? That'll be what it would be like, right? So all of these topics are stuff that we need to keep our life going. Obviously, water's life, and water needs to be running in the home. Now, this all is contingent on the system still kind of working and still being there, and being able to go and get parts eventually, even though we're going to stock up on everything we can. But what happens if the literal shit hit the literal fan, and you know what? We're out of other options. We have no more parts. We can't get to the store. We don't have any other way to fix something, but we got to get by. So, you know what? There's a few things you can do. And some of these, and this is long-term. This is like worst case scenario, like Doc Bones and Nurse Amy, when they give their disclaimer for their book, like post-apocalyptic times, like this is, maybe not quite that bad, but bad, right? So know how to dig a well. This is something the old timers used to know. I knew people who swore they could witch wells. If you guys have ever seen that, what do they call it? Divining rods or whatever. I'm not sure I believe in it. I'm going to be honest about it. But some of the old timers used to say they could walk and they knew, okay, this water vein would go here. This water vein would go here. Okay, these two are going to cross here. Anyway, excuse me, guys. Whatever happens, you hopefully figure out a way, find a wet spot on your property. Now, this isn't feasible for everybody, but for a lot of people, just having a place in your mind, you're like, okay, I might need to hand dig a well. And that could be a real pain in the butt. But, you might have to dig down 6-10 feet, line the whole thing with rocks, flush it out over and over again. But just have an idea of where you can do that. Number 2, maybe look at rain storage. So, if you've got no other water situation at this point, some of them big IBC totes that have only ever held water or food grade products you can use for, water runoff from your eaves troughs, or if you want to get crazy, like Dave, the NBC guy, and have an underground storage. I think he used it for root cellar, but same thing. Put like a septic tank or whatever and hold hundreds of gallons of water, rainwater runoff. That'll give you storage. And then have a Berkey filter on hand. So if your water gets really contaminated, you can use the Berkey filter to filter out all that crap. Now, a Berkey filter is an incredible investment. We use it every single day, and we just use it to make our water taste better. But if something really bad really did happen, that Berkey filter could be a matter of life and death for us, and it could get all of that junk out of there. So that's one of those 2 is 1 thing, where everything I try to buy has 2 uses, the day-to-day use and the prepper use. So Berkey's really good at that. Now, if you've got a hand-dug well, another thing that's really handy is those old-fashioned cistern handle pumps. So have one of those on hand, a manual pump, a way to get water out that is completely has no need of electricity. Those are good, and then keep an extra set of seals on hand. They have old leather cups in them that work really well. Now, if you have a toilet and you can't get water supplied to that toilet, you're going to have a bad time. Like I told you, most people know this, some people don't. But if you can haul water in buckets from outdoors, and this could be puddle water, it could be friggin' slough water, I don't care. But if you bring a 5-gallon bucket of water in with you, do your business in the toilet, and then dump that water straight into the bowl, that will flush. Charlotte agrees on the Berkey filter. It's great. It is great. The thing's awesome. Our filters are getting clogged up. I got to change them. But now, so that's the first thing. That I got 2 hacks for toilets here, and this is lack of water supply, right? First one was dump a bucket in there. Now, here is the next one, and you guys might laugh, but I've been on job sites before when I can't get away, and nature has called, and I have no water because the water's turned off because we're doing plumbing in there. But you know what's nice is to still be able to sit on a toilet to do your business. So the best way is to take a heavy-duty garbage bag, put it down in the bowl of the toilet, then put the lid down or the seat down over there, do your business, put your paper in there, lift your lid back up, tie your bag off, and go throw it the hell in the dumpster and never think about it again. But that is something you can do. Chris says, here's one here. 1 gallon of water will effectively flush a new toilet. Experience, LOL. Yes. And a heavy-duty contractor's grade garbage bag fits nicely into the bowl, and you can do your business, tie it up, and throw it out. So that's not ideal, but that is another reason to keep garbage bags on hand. And if you had literally no water, if it was a drought and you couldn't flush your toilet anymore, but you still wanted to use your bathroom facilities, and this is worst case scenario, right? But it works. Now, here's oh, come on, Tim, just use a Home Depot bucket. Yes, Chris, I know that is true too. But who doesn't love the comfort of a toilet? So you don't have running water, but you still want to sit on your toilet, and read the shampoo bottle like we used to do when we were, in the 80s and didn't have cell phones to occupy our time, right? Now, if you live in either a climate that doesn't freeze or you're in the 6 months of the year where you have no concerns of freezing, and say you have a really nasty rupture underwater, underground, and you don't have the time or the ability to dig up your water lines, you can run a temporary water line above ground. And like I said, if it's not going to freeze, it's not going to bother anything. So that's why we keep enough water line on hand to be able to run all the way down the well and all the way up. But if you can get a hold of your water line just where it comes to the top of the well, haul it up, cut it off, hook up your new water line there, run it in through a basement window or whatever it happens to be, hook it up to your pump, unless there's a pump down in your well. Now, at least you've got water. Now you've bought yourself some time. Now you might be able to figure out a way to to barter with a neighbor who, might live up the hill from you and have an excavator, and they might be able to come down in a week, but they can't come down in a day, right? So again, think outside the box. But yeah, that's about it. If it's not freezing out and you need water, figure out a way to get water. If you don't have an extra water line and you got 2 or 3 garden hoses, that'll get you some water. Figure out if you've got some fittings you can step down and get going, do that. But yeah, so that's kind of my, end of the world as we know it, worst case scenario water supply hacks. I hope some of them help. I've used every one of them, I think. Maybe. No, I haven't dug a well by hand yet. I'd love to someday, but that's another story for another day. But so that's it, guys. That is water supply side in a nutshell. I'm sure we'll come back to it down the road. Next week, like I said, we're going to deal with sewer issues. I love talking about this stuff. I hope you guys are learning something. If you have questions about sewer ahead of time, send them along my way. Like I said, it's going to be a crappy subject, a shitty subject, but we'll make it work, won't we? If you guys want to, thanks, Charlotte. I always love you, sweetie. If you guys want to join me on Sunday night, I've got Buddy from Bud DIY coming on the podcast. He's going to talk about becoming a woodworker, independent living, all of that. You're very welcome, Joe. Always appreciate you, my friend. But yes, drop by the YouTube channel on Sunday. And like I said, we've got, a little change in the schedule over the holidays, but I figured I'm going to take that 2 weeks off. And then of course had to add the other week, right? Now, if you guys want to keep hearing top quality preparedness content, tune in to PBN. That's the Prepper Broadcast Network. That's who we're on tonight, which I'm eternally grateful for, James. It's awesome. I love it. Tomorrow, you'll have Carl A.D. Brown with The Strange Truth. It's always a lively discussion. He's a pretty cool dude. I love listening to him. The discussion centered around Christianity, preparedness, and the news stories that no one dares to touch. So anyway, guys, like I said, check it out. If you're interested, run by PBN, the Prepper Broadcast Network. And if you're really interested and you want to support them, support us at this point, you can sign up for a membership and become a member. And there's a ton of extra content behind the wall over there. But anyway, that's it for now. Oh, I see John Grohl showed up. Said Wranglestar did a video on dividing rods to find septic and water lanes, even electrical wires. I'm going to have to check that again. So it's the Prepper. Let me see if I can bring it up for you guys. The Prepper Broadcast. If you type Prepper Broadcast Network into Google, that'll bring it up. I'll make sure I have the URL set up perfect for you. I just don't want to misspell it, but if you Google it, that's what it'll bring it up, and then you can check out some more. And that's the way to get started. Give me 1 second here, Joe, and I'll bring it up. Prepper Broadcast Network. Sorry, guys, I should know this by now. It's prepperbroadcasting.com. So if you go by prepperbroadcasting.com, that's where you can find out more about PBN. Incredible network of well over a dozen content creators at this point. And you're going to be on it tonight. Yeah, we're actually live on there right now. So we're doing YouTube, Float, Odyssey, and now PBN. And so this podcast will be automatically through their feed as well. And you can check out all the other content creators as well. So anyway, guys, for my American friends below the Canadian border, happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're, not sick of turkey, and Christmas is right around the corner. Anyway, guys, as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.